But first tonight, Labor MPs are dismayed at Anthony Albanese's poor performance this campaign. His chances of winning outright majority government, they fear, are slipping away with every gaffe on every day of the campaign. That doesn't mean he's not going to end up as Prime Minister with the support of the independents, but there is concern in the Labor Party that outright majority government is looking shaky. It has to be said, though, that Labor is still well ahead in the national polls. The polls, we know, were wrong at the last election, and national polls, again, are less relevant when the reality is that about a dozen or so seats will decide the outcome of this election: the suburban and inner city marginals. And it's the inner city seats that are giving Anthony Albanese a path to victory, his best path to victory, through the support of the independents, mostly Labor Green candidates in disguise. And I'm going to come back to that topic in a minute. The daily spotlight of the campaign has exposed Albanese's inability to grasp policies, his inability to get across the detail, and there are now questions within his own party about his competency. It goes without saying that Australia deserves an intelligent Prime Minister who not only understands complex economic, foreign and social policy, but understands them enough to reform them to suit our changing times and to cope with unexpected disasters that might unfold. We need someone who is across the detail. The Prime Minister has seized on Albanese's errors to make the claim that he isn't up to the job. This on the front page of the Courier Mail this weekend. In the final 2 weeks of the campaign, Albanese now has the challenge of proving to voters that he is across policy, that he is competent enough to govern. 4 weeks into the campaign, there have only been questions about his performance that were not there before this. It has to be said that Labor's best week was the week when Albanese had COVID. Labor MPs are exasperated at the prospect that he could cost them this election, a winnable election for Labor, that it could be another 3 years in the political wilderness on top of the 9 they've already had. And they're so concerned that they're speaking about it in the media. One senior Labor figure told the Australian newspaper that Albanese's failure to know his own NDIS policy is horrible and embarrassing. That's a quote. Another Labor MP said it could be better for the campaign if Albanese got COVID again. It's so bad that the Labor leader, who wants to be Prime Minister, can't even hold a solo press conference anymore. He needs to be propped up by his shadows, the shadow ministers, who are clearly more experienced at handling questions from the media and are more across the policy detail. This is a crucial point in the campaign. It will come down to these final 2 weeks. And at this point, Labor's biggest liability is their leader. Now, there's a big push, and you would have seen it, from Albanese and his media cheer squad, and this includes journalists at The Guardian and the Sydney Morning Herald, to blame the press pack and the media for Albanese's failures. It's nonsense. The NDIS, a policy worth $40 billion, bigger even than Medicare. And Albanese keeps citing this policy as a reason to vote for Labor. So he does need to know the detail of the policy he's putting forward to the public. This isn't the media's fault that he didn't know his own 6-point plan. Channel 9's political editor, Chris Uhlmann, who was formerly at the ABC, he said that not only is the media not to blame for this, but this is exactly the media's job during an election campaign.
I don't see, and by the way, we rotate people on these teams. So the same people that have been through Anthony Albanese's teams have been rotated. Anthony Albanese's campaign have been rotated through Scott Morrison's campaign. These are the same journalists on different parts of the trail, and all of them are trying to do the best that they can by the people of Australia. This is the exam, Chris. This is the test. This should be hard. Getting to be Prime Minister. The thing is that Scott Morrison has been tested over the last 3 years, is used to this kind of environment. He expects a hostile media environment. Anthony Albanese walked into this campaign, it would appear, without ever having faced that kind of environment, ever having faced these really tough questions. He should have been ready for this test, and this was the test that Scott Morrison set him. That's why he wanted a 6-week campaign. He has to run him down, and he believed that Anthony Albanese would be exposed in the campaign. Now, it would appear that the Prime Minister's calculation so far has paid off.
That was Chris Ullman on Chris Kenny's show on Friday. Now, at this point, and a lot can change in the next 2 weeks, but at this point, if Albanese does become Prime Minister, it's likely it will be with the help of the independents and not through a landslide victory, despite what the polls keep telling us. On Friday, Albanese turned angry and he turned on the media for its scrutiny.
Can you give a guarantee that Labor would not make any cuts to health, education or the NDIS?
Labor will always be better on health, education and the NDIS. This is an example of what puts people off politics. You cannot have a clearer answer than that Labor is putting additional funding into health, education and the NDIS, and we stand by it. And you know what puts people off politics? That sort of word game. That is very clear. It can't be clearer.
How can he lose his temper and yell, that is yelling, at the Australians' Rachel Baxendale just for doing her job and asking questions that voters deserve to know the answers to? The same questions that are being asked of both leaders, Scott Morrison and Anthony Albanese, but yet she gets yelled at. A young female journalist, how is that appropriate? The reality is, we are now looking at a situation where the independents could be the path to victory for Albanese. The independents are only running in seats against the Liberals, as you know. They're not running in seats against Labor. And Labor is mostly running dead in those seats to help the independents get up. Paul Kelly wrote a brilliant analysis piece on the independents in The Australian this weekend, and here's how he put it. He said Australia faces the prospect of a change of government on a de facto alliance between the Labor Party and the anti-Liberal independents who run on a misrepresentation about their identity. He said the independents seek not reform of the Liberals, but their destruction as a governing force. John Howard summed this up well a few days ago when he explained how a vote for an independent is a vote for Labor. Here's John Howard on Paul Murray the other night.
If you support an anti-Liberal groupie in one of these hitherto safe Liberal seats, you are taking one off our list and giving it to the Labor Party. Anybody who thinks that supporting an anti-Liberal independent will deliver some short-term rebuke and you can still have a Liberal government is daydreaming.
One of the independents, Monique Ryan, and she's running against Josh Frydenberg, she was actually a member of the Labor Party and quit in outrage at how Kevin Rudd was treated. It's something she admitted just this week in her Sky News debate.
I was a member of the Labor Party for a brief period between 2007 and 2010. I joined the Labor Party because I believed Kevin Rudd when he said he was going to take effective action on climate change. He didn't, and I moved on.
And listen to Allegra Spender say, clear as day, she'd be willing to back Labor into government despite the fact she's running in a traditional Liberal seat and comes from a Liberal family.
I'm open to work with either side of government.
I think you're being dishonest with them. You've got to level with them. You've got to say, if I'm elected, this is who I'll support.
But I think the point and reason why I'm not saying that is, one, I have not made up my mind. It depends what
comes
on the negotiating.
Will you make up your mind before the election?
No, it depends on what happens on the negotiating table on the day.
I think you owe it. I think you owe it to the public to tell them before the election.
I'm about policy, and the point is that the community is about policy. It's not about parties.
And we both have policy platforms, Liberal and Labor Party. You can study them now and decide which one you'd like to support.
No, and I will negotiate very, very effectively for this community.
And it's a good point. The policies of both parties on the issues that she cares about, climate change and integrity, are already published. So if she is deciding over climate change and integrity, then clearly that would be a vote for Labor. By the way, Monique Ryan gave a very similar answer to Allegra Spender on this question. It's almost like they're running from the same political lines, from the same political party. And this is problematic when they claim to be standing for integrity, but treat voters with such disdain that they won't even be transparent about who they'd support to govern this country in the case of a hung parliament. And this is exactly why none of the independents will say who they'd support, because they want to sweep up the Greens and Labor voters by making them think they'd support Labor, and they want to sweep up the Liberal Party and Jewish vote, because many of the seats they're running in have a high Jewish population, by making them think they'd support the coalition. Again, to quote Paul Kelly's brilliant piece on this issue, he said, "But Ryan, like the other so-called independents, won't say this. She won't come clean." He said, why won't she do this? Because to speak honestly would be to destroy her campaign. Paul Kelly made the point that she can only win, he was speaking about Monique Ryan, she can only win by persuading Liberal voters to switch and vote for her as an independent. If she says her voting intentions are Labor, then she wouldn't win Kooyong. Paul Kelly goes on to say, concealment of their core identity is their road to power. Such a powerful line, and it's so true. The independents refuse to nominate who they want to govern. Why would they bother? Kelly makes this point as well. Why would they bother to tell the electorate who they want to govern the country? They just risk losing votes. Now, Malcolm Turnbull claimed this week that supporting the independents would get rid of the right wing of the Liberal Party, something he's obviously been campaigning for since he was overthrown as Prime Minister. But in fact, the argument doesn't make sense. It's not logical, and it's the precise opposite. The independents aren't running against Conservative figures like Peter Dutton or Barnaby Joyce. They're doing the reverse. They're running against the most progressive, the most moderate members of the Liberal Party, so much so that you would hear on Outsiders the hosts attacking these Liberal MPs. They're so moderate. So if the independents are successful, and if voters elect them, in fact, they would be getting rid of the most moderate members of the Liberal Party and making the Liberal Party even more conservative, not to mention probably kicking them out of government. At this point in the campaign, Albanese's best chance of victory is with the help of these independents.